Good morning, Metalheads here now. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we're looking at the debut solo album from Kirk Windstein entitled Dream in Motion. That's right, Kirk Windstein, a champion of the New Orleans doom, sludge, and heavy metal scene through projects such as Duane and Crowbar, is now here with his first ever solo album. I'm sure some people are wondering, why is there a solo album and not a new Crowbar record, considering that's his main project, and it's been about 4 years since their last album, and it makes sense to release a new album since they're gearing up for a big tour of Sepultura. I don't have the answers to these questions. I don't know Kirk personally. If he reaches out to me, I'll happily let y'all know, but I doubt that'll happen. I really sincerely doubt that. But while I can't tell you why this is released under the name Kirk Windstein as opposed to Crowbar, I do have a theory. And that theory has a lot to do with the sound, the aesthetic, and the concept of this record. You see, this is not your typical Crowbar southern metal fuzz and sludge fest. No, not at all. Anyone coming in here looking for big mammoth riffs and grit is going to be immediately puzzled and perhaps even disappointed. What we have here is a lot more introspective, a lot more reflective, a lot more emotionally centered, a lot more mature, a lot less raucous, a lot less, well, rock and roll and metal to a certain extent. Doom and sludge are definitely still a part of this, but I would not call this a doom or sludge metal record. This has more in common with post-metal, some alternative metal, dare I say some really heavy grunge in the vein of a band like the Melvins. And every aspect of this record shows a much more soulful, sensitive, and vulnerable side of Kirk that, to my direct memory, has never been shown or even referenced in any of his other works, be they with Duane, Crowbar, or any of his collaborations and guest appearances over the years. Kirk is doing a lot of things on this record that, frankly, I had never expected him to do, and while it may come across as jarring to your average metalhead, I think it will go down as perhaps being one of 2020's most memorable and unique outings, particularly for those looking for something more emotional, progressive, and heartfelt within their heavy metal. It would not be inappropriate to say that this album has an immediate and effective emotional weight to it, but it would be more appropriate. It would not be inappropriate to say that this album has an immediate emotional effect to it, but it would be more correct to say that rather than simply having an emotional core, it just completely swallows you within its own emotional universe. Like, this entire album kind of feels like sitting in a therapist's office with Kirk, and he is just pouring his heart out, venting his soul, exposing himself, his humiliation, his worries, his fears of death and loneliness, while you sit there with a pen and paper, fresh out of fucking school, trying to figure out what he's saying and what you can do to help him. Like, I don't fucking know, Kirk. I just started this job. Give me a break here. His signature raspy, hardcore southern bite feels so much more demented, miserable, devastating on this album. If you had told me that Kirk lost someone very dear to him during the creation of this thing, I would have believed you. He sounds absolutely tortured on this thing. You can literally hear the strain, the crackles in his voice in every single note. And it's not just his vocal performance, his lyrics are so much more affectionate than I ever would have expected. Take, for instance, on the opening track, Dream in Motion. I've seen so much through all the years. I've seen the light through burning tears. I've done my best to turn away and kill the darkness every single day. Reflecting on his life and his personal struggles with depression, a theme commonly referred to throughout the album, but referred to so immediately here in the very first track, it's quite striking. And then immediately after, on the following track, Hollow Dying Man, he almost sounds as if he's completely giving up. Reflection doesn't matter. There's no time to learn, to evolve, to adapt, to change. It's done. As he laments here, you wake then realize it's gone. All your hope is gone. The end is near. Too late. All you had is gone. You're lying in despair. A hollow, dying man. The closest thing you come to any kind of positivity and light comes within the still crushing instrumental, The Healing. But even this is nothing more than a flicker, as the album very shortly ends after that on The Ugly Truth, where Kirk really does once again sound like he has completely given up on his life. Miserably plotting with, I see the truth, the ugly truth, the never-ending misery, holding darkness, fearing emptiness, embrace nothing, drowning once again. And all of this is emboldened and complemented by the album's aforementioned emotional weight and height. Sure, the music itself can be a little bit repetitive and monotonous at times, inherently speaking, but it's also somewhat meditative. It almost hypnotizes you and puts you in this trance-like state as you sit there and just absorb everything that Kirk has to say. But perhaps knowing that some people would still feel that way, Kirk does wisely implement some more subtle changes into the musical DNA of this thing. Take, for instance, Toxic, which does indeed hearken to the heavier sounds that I think Crowbar fans are looking for. As does the aforementioned instrumental bruiser, The Healing. And I also appreciate how Kirk really expands on the emotional components of this sound by delving into some actual slow-moving ballads that are quite elegant and still retain a little bit of his crust and his raw energy. Ultimately, the only thing that really hurts this album at the end of the day is the very odd inclusion of a cover of Jethro Tull's Aqualung, which comes in at the very end of the album. Not only does it rob Dream in Motion the opportunity of ending on the incredibly emotionally complex and disastrous Ugly Truth, creating something cinematic and bold and daring, but it's just frankly not a very good cover. And I'll also admit that while I do enjoy the layout of this album, I do think it would benefit from a few more of those subtle musical shifts, a few more additional flavors and spices thrown in. Despite my criticisms and concerns, I'm still wildly impressed and intrigued by this album. Kirk has completely laid bare his heart and soul and showed a much more vulnerable, sensitive, and affectionate side of his musical DNA and personality that I never would have associated with Crowbar, Down, or any number of projects that he's worked on. I would still give this a 4 out of 5. Maybe not the most enthusiastic 4 out of 5, considering it does still have a couple issues, but a 4 out of 5 nonetheless. Not only is this record incredibly surprising and emotionally complex and rich, it's also just generally my favorite album I've heard from Kirk in a long, long time. Now, granted, I'm not the biggest Crowbar fan in the world. Respect the hell out of them, but they've never been my cup of tea. So therefore, I don't know how much that might mean to some of y'all out there. But that's just how I feel. I mean, every time I've listened to a Crowbar record, I've enjoyed them. But I've never really immediately wanted to sink my teeth back into them and explore their emotional layers because they don't have any. This does, and I want to explore them, and I want to spend more time with this album, and I really want to dig into everything Kirk is saying and doing on this. Again, I really don't know if Crowbar fans are going to feel the same way. I think this is just different enough that it'll provoke Crowbar fans, and it just won't sit well with them. But if that's the case, then I honestly feel bad for you, because it sounds like you'll be missing out on maybe the best metal album of the year so far. Granted, it's only January, so it's hard to say if this would end up in my top 5 or anything at the end of the year. But just thinking of everything I've listened to so far this month, this year, I can definitely say this is the thing I've enjoyed the most, this is the thing I've explored the most, and this is the thing I've wanted to come back to the most. So 4 out of 5, it's definitely not going to be for everybody, but for the people that it is for, you are going to have such a goddamn blast with this. Well, blast is perhaps the wrong word, but I think by now you understand what I mean. 4 out of 5, a seriously great record. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.